Hi, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to do number 27, Journal 27 today. And it's from Saturday, June 18th, 2022. The title is Real People. Hi, everyone. I've been asked if any of my characters are inspired by real living people. Yes, all of them. But I think every character who has ever been written is based on real people. Truly inventing a person, like making a whole Eve out of nothing but a rib, would require a deity. I am not a deity, so I need a bit more material to work with. And I think everyone writes this way. Like police sketch artists, the descriptions are real, but what we draw on the page is half invented. We cobble together characters from the features of our communities. Maybe we combine them in novel ways, but no character is totally original. And the best among them, e.g., Ignatius Riley, seem to be the most real, at least to me. Which is why I take my sketch artistry so seriously, illustrating as realistically as I can. The easiest way to ensoul a literary character, I've found, is to borrow the soul of a real person. It's not like they were doing anything with it. I justify the reappropriations. I'm actually going to put it to use, really make something of its life. I continue because my first justification didn't fully absolve my guilt. So again, yes, my characters do have a soulmate in the real world, but it's not always obvious, even if you're a careful reader and know the character's inspiration. My friend Fred, for example, the same Fred from Journal 25. Who was he in my life? Gandalf, Dumbledore, Obi-Wan, etc. The list is long. Wise old mentor may be the biggest sci-fi cliche there is, but it's a true rarity in the real world. Soleil had Leonardo, and he pissed it away. I had Fred, and I managed to hold in some of my piss. I could have worked harder, been more focused, gained more from his guidance, but if I had done those things, it wouldn't have been the cliche. A flawed protagonist who fails to actualize his potential when he has the chance. Without the recklessness of youth, there's no story to tell, and that story has already been told a million times. Just consult any book on the sci-fi shelf. But in real life, this kind of mentorship is awfully rare, probably one in a million, and I was one of them. So, does this character appear in my book? No, it wouldn't have worked. One of the most personal and intimate relationships I've ever had would be represented in an impersonal and timid way. It seemed reasonable in an algebraic sense to cancel the double negative in intimate. That doesn't mean I purged Fred from my roster of influences. He's there pretty prominently, never as a wise old mentor, but a sketch artist likeness of him does make appearances elsewhere, as a chef, for instance. In book two, there's a debate between two chefs. This is representative of Fred's and my relationship today. We undertake long, elaborate arguments, parsing our opposing premises to death until, after a series of exhausting redefinitions, we finally arrive at a disappointing compromise. But in the end, we've both learned a little bit more about ourselves, or at least that feels true for me. And the productivity of the exchange makes it worth repeating. I guess I should just post one of our email exchanges. There are 1,000 I could choose from. This one, that's a link, seems a reasonable choice. The reason will be obvious to anyone who gets through it. And now, when you encounter Book Two's quarreling chefs, you'll know the inspiration was Gandalf. Okay, that's it for number 27. More to say on the topic of inspirations, of influences, of real characters. I only mentioned one, Fred, in this, but every character I write has a real world counterpart. There's somebody I'm drawing inspiration from, and if I didn't do that, if I wasn't being true to their, now they're fictional situations, they're sort of invented scenarios, these situations these characters find themselves in. But if I weren't drawing from some real person and trying to channel that voice, it would feel inauthentic. And I have an example of this, which I think may be useful in a corresponding prop. So when my wife and I go to bed at night, almost every night, we read to each other. We're each other's nighttime audibles, and we get actual physical books and read them. And one of the recent books we did was Stephen King's Fairy Tale. Now, most half of these books we just don't make it through because we're just like, it's stupid. I get this book, we put it down and move on to something else. There's a finite amount of attention we have, and just squandering it on like a pointless book seems almost criminal. But I mean, this was kind of thick and we made it through, meaning we enjoyed the book. But that doesn't mean it's without problems problems that we felt that maybe not everyone does. And the one that we kept noticing was these situations where the protagonist, the lead role is Charlie Reed, where he doesn't feel real. Where the voice seems fake. Now, I mean, he's a 17-year-old kid like with an iPhone, and he watches TCM. Okay, and he loves MASH, the show, like the TV show MASH. He has all of these thoughts on Paul Newman, and he's a Shaquille O'Neal. Not like so like Shaq as a commentator is one thing. That's not it. He's a Shaq fan from the college days when Shaq was at LSU, and I think if Stephen King knew a real 17-year-old kid and could consult him and really channel that voice, be true to it, not just fill in the blanks with his own imagination, insert nothing of himself into that character's, reasoning and predilections, it would have been more believable, at least to my wife and me. But the character seemed to be like a balloon that, and Stephen King just blew him up with way too much of his own breath. And that popped it for me. It started to feel like in the early days of the internet, late 90s, early 2000s, there were these chat boards everywhere and filled with creepy 60-year-olds trying to seduce teenagers by pretending to be one of them, but like they're tells, they're just like, okay, that's not who you are. And that's kind of what it felt like. So my character, my lead role, kind of, at least the character whose voice sits in some ways, the main character, is a projection of me. It's not exactly precisely me. It's like an avatar navigating the wilds of like a golden age RPG landscape. And I do it that way because that's how I like stories to be told. I buy in more in those situations. Like my favorite writer of all time is Oscar Wilde. I keep saying this and I'm going to keep saying it because I just don't think he had a peer, and still today has yet to have a peer be born. And if you read his work, pretty much any of it, tons of his characters have tons of Oscar in them. Like, I mean, the entire cast is practically uniform in its voice and personality. And I love it, right? That doesn't take me out of it. In my early 20s, I went through this Fitzgerald phase. And I read and reread all of his books. And my favorite one is his first, This Side of Paradise, and which is, the plot is basically like Amory Blaine does nothing. But Amory Blaine is Fitzgerald. I mean, it's just super Fitzgerald. And then the second book comes along, Beautiful and the Damned, and which is like Anthony Patch does sort of nothing again, is the plot. But again, it's the protagonist is Fitzgerald of a kind, and that made it feel real to me. Now, there's something else to consider in terms of putting ourselves into our characters, taking inspiration from others and building upon that inspiration. It also goes the other way. The more time a writer spends inside a protagonist's head, the more alike that protagonist the writer becomes. It's a two-way influence, and it's not just writing. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so take nothing I say as truth here, but just as a thought. Singers who have very despondent, like depressing, dispiriting, distressing lyrics and play like a Chester Bennington goes on stage night after night doing these performances and channeling these feelings, almost certainly is going to have this feedback loop where they too get influenced by it. Or like something that we've all probably seen is somebody who has a spectacular accent. They come from whatever country, and here they are with this phenomenal accent, and but they spend several years among, like, really attentively spend those years among people with plainer accents. Their voice changes. I mean, literally, their voice begins to change. So it's not just the writer's mindset that influences the page. The page affects the writer's mind as well, the reasoning and the perceptions and predilections of the writer. So I'll leave it at that. I hope the rest of your day and week and month are filled with communities of authentic people, and that is, gives you some satisfaction and inspiration. Okay, bye everyone.